I'm not proud of how calm I sounded when I said, "Sure, I'll archive it." Because 3 months later, I'd be sitting in a glass conference room watching our CFO tap a single line on a printed page. One line that said our rejected project had sold at auction for $4.2 million, and the room would go silent like someone had cut the power. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back then, I was just a senior product engineer at a mid-sized SaaS company that loved to call itself lean, while it burned money like it was trying to heat the building with it. We built workflow software for regulated industries, banks, insurance carriers, healthcare admin. Everything had to be documented, versioned, and approved, which is why what happened later felt impossible until I realized it wasn't impossible at all. It was paperwork. The project had a dumb internal name, Harbor, because our VP liked nautical metaphors. The goal was simple and unglamorous, a compliance-first audit layer that could sit on top of our existing platform and generate regulator-ready evidence trails without customers having to hire a consultant to babysit exports. It wasn't flashy. It was valuable. For 9 months, my life was Harbor. Early mornings, late nights, and the kind of weekends where you forget what day it is because your brain is stuck inside edge cases. I wasn't the only one on it. There were 6 of us. But I was the one who owned the architecture and the client calls. I was the one who had to tell a Fortune 500 risk officer, "Yes, we can prove who changed what, when, and why," and then go home and make sure we actually could. The week we finished the first pilot, one of our biggest clients, Stonewell Financial, asked if they could make it part of their renewal. They were ready to pay an extra $600K a year for it. Not a vague maybe. A line item. I remember because I stared at the email like it was a miracle. I forwarded it to Darren, our VP of Product, with the subject, "Harbor Upsell. Stonewell wants it in renewal." He replied 10 minutes later, "Not strategic. We're moving to AI Assist. Let's discuss in roadmap." Not strategic became his favorite phrase that quarter. The rejection meeting happened on a Tuesday at 4 p.m., which is the corporate equivalent of taking someone out back behind the warehouse. Darren invited me, my manager, Tanya, a director from strategy, Melissa, and someone from legal I'd never met, Asha Patel, who listened like she was taking deposition notes. Darren didn't waste time. He clicked to a slide that said, in bold, "Focus. Core Platform plus AI." Then he said, "We're sunsetting Harbor. It's a distraction. Archive the work." I waited for the part where he explained how you sunset a project that had paying demand and regulatory tailwinds. That part never came. I tried anyway. I kept my voice steady, like I was asking for clarification on a parking policy. Stonewell offered $600 a year. They're not the only one. If we ship this, we reduce churn and increase expansion. We also de-risk audits for our enterprise tier. Melissa smiled like I'd told a cute story. Darren leaned back. "We can't build everything, and we're not in the business of selling compliance modules." Tanya shifted in her chair, but she didn't jump in. She'd been warned. I could see it in her eyes. The strained kind of apology you give someone you can't protect. Asha finally spoke. "If it's being archived, we need to confirm IP assignment and repository access. Standard." That word, access, stuck with me. "Standard," Darren echoed. "We'll do it clean. No loose ends. I want the repo locked and the docs moved to archive. We'll keep the learnings. Keep the learnings. Delete the product." After the meeting, Darren sent an email to the group, a tidy recap with bullet points, and that soft, weaponized tone corporate leaders use when they're about to erase months of work. Action items. Archive Harbor documentation by Friday. Restrict repository access to engineering, leadership, and legal. Remove Harbor from customer roadmap materials. Notify sales, not currently planned. He added one line at the bottom. "Thanks, everyone. Good work here. Let's stay focused." I didn't reply. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I just saved the email. Not because I thought I'd need it for revenge. I saved it because when you build things for a living, You learn to trust paper more than people. That night, I pulled the Harbor folder into a clean archive structure, exported the architecture docs to PDF, and pushed a final tag in Git Harbor/final v1.opus. I wrote release notes nobody would read. I logged the decisions in our ticketing system. I did everything clean. Friday afternoon, access disappeared exactly like Asha said it would. Repo permissions changed. The Confluence space went read only. Even the Slack channel got renamed to Harbor Archive and muted by default. On Monday, Stonewell's risk officer emailed asking for the rollout timeline. Sales forwarded it to me with a single sentence. What do I tell them? I stared at my screen for a long time, then typed back, tell them it's not currently planned. That was the first time I felt something in my chest crack. Not anger, not sadness, but a kind of humiliating clarity. I'd spent 9 months making something real, and someone above me could unmake it with 4 bullets and an action items header. 2 weeks later, layoffs started. Not my team at first, then adjacent teams, then contractors, then whole programs. The company was rebalancing. The CEO did an all-hands with a forced smile and said we were sharpening focus. I kept my head down. I did my work. I updated my resume quietly like everyone else, but I didn't leave. I had stock I couldn't exercise yet, and a mortgage that didn't care about my pride. Then on a rainy Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Evan, an FP&A analyst I'd known since he'd joined out of college. Evan was the kind of guy who still believed spreadsheets could tell the truth. He sent one screenshot, a listing page with a gray logo and a title that made my stomach drop. Enterprise Compliance Workflow IP Package, Harbor. Status, sold, final bid, $4,200,000 or seller, Northbridge Systems Inc., our company. Evan wrote, Dude, is this your thing? I didn't answer right away. My fingers went cold, because if Harbor was sold, it wasn't just archived. It was transferred, and transfers require signatures. I typed back, Where did you get this? He replied, Asset Disposition Report. I'm on the monthly review. They're trying to move stuff before year end. Call me. I opened Darren's old recap email in my save folder and stared at the line about restricting access. Then I looked at the time. 8:36 a.m. And for the first time since that rejection meeting, I wasn't thinking like an employee. I was thinking like a witness. Because someone had taken a not strategic project, locked me out of it, and turned it into $4.2 million in cash. And I had a feeling they'd made one mistake. But that was just the beginning. Evan called me from a stairwell because, in his words, walls have ears in finance. He didn't sound excited. He sounded careful. Like he'd already opened a door he couldn't close. You didn't hear this from me, he said. But yeah, it's your project. Same internal code, same deliverables list. They stripped the branding and called it an IP package. Sold for 4.2. I kept my voice flat. Who approved it? A pause. Then, that's the part you're going to hate. He told me the sale showed up in an asset disposition report, the kind of thing companies use when they're cleaning up hardware, sunsetting products, or selling old patents. It wasn't routed like a product deal. It wasn't sales. It wasn't partnerships. It was treated like scrap. Disposition needs a sponsor, Evan said. Usually a VP. Then legal blesses it. IT verifies what's being transferred. Finance books it. There's supposed to be a trail. Supposed to be, I repeated. I can't pull the full packet, he said. My access is summary level, but I can see the line item, the buyer name, and some notes. What notes? He exhaled. It was marked non-core, abandoned initiative, and valued at basically nothing on the books, like de minimis. My jaw tightened. I could already picture Darren saying the words in that smooth, moral-free tone. Not strategic. Archive it. Stay focused. And the buyer? I asked. Evan read it out. A holding company. Something like Palisade Ridge Ventures. Delaware. Not one of our customers. That set off a different kind of alarm in my head. Regulated clients don't buy random IP packages off auctions unless they know exactly what they're getting or someone is guiding them. "Send me what you have," I said. "I can't email it," he snapped immediately. "But I can show you. After work, off-site." That was the first time that morning I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Not sadness, irritation, the kind that comes from being treated like you're naive. "Fine," I said. "Text me a place." By noon, the story started moving inside the company like smoke. Sales pinged me again about Stonewell. Still asking, still pressing. Support asked if we were bringing back that compliance thing. Someone on my team said they'd heard a buyer was interested in a dormant initiative. And then at 1:17 p.m., a calendar invite landed in my inbox. Subject, quick sync. Harbor disposition, attendees, CFO, Mark, legal, Asha, compliance, Rhina, Darren, me, duration 30 minutes, location 14B Glass Conference. No agenda, just a polite little box around my day like I'd been pre-scheduled to be managed. I stared at the invite until the irritation turned into something sharper, because if they were inviting me now, it meant one of two things. Either they thought I knew nothing, or they were about to make sure I stayed quiet. I didn't decline. I accepted. Then I opened my saved folder and pulled up Darren's archive email again, the bullet points, the access restriction, the do it clean language. I exported it to PDF, saved a copy to my personal drive, and forwarded it to myself at home with the subject line, Harbor, disposition trail, not dramatic, just practical. Then I started mapping what I still had access to. Ticketing system, yes. My own sent emails, yes. Confluence read only PDFs, yes. My local repo tag from the last day, yes, because I'd mirrored the final release notes on my machine, like a paranoid idiot who liked backups. And then I did one more thing. I pulled up the last ticket I'd closed on Harbor, the one where I documented the final architecture decisions, the one Darren probably never read. The audit history showed who had viewed it recently. There were new names in the log from the past 48 hours, people who had never touched Harbor while it was alive. Legal, compliance, 2 finance ops accounts, and Darren. My fingers hovered over the mouse. I wasn't angry that they'd sold it. Companies sell things. Companies pivot. It happens. I was angry at the pattern. Reject it. Lock me out. Rename it. Sell it. Invite me later. Like I was a janitor you call after the fire, not the person who built the wiring. At 5:40 p.m., Evan texted me an address for a coffee shop across town. One of those sterile places near corporate parks where nobody recognizes you and nobody looks up. He was already there when I walked in. No laptop, just a folder on the table like this was a divorce. He slid his phone across to me. On the screen was the same listing I'd seen earlier, but this time there were extra fields, internal codes, disposition category, and a tiny link that said bid activity, summary. My chest tightened when I read it. There were multiple bids, not just one winning number. And before the public bid started, before any outside party could even see it, there was a line that made no sense. Internal interest logged. Yes, pre-listing bids. 5. I looked up at Evan. Pre-listing bids? He gave me a look like he'd been holding it in all day. That's why I called you. That isn't normal for junk IP. Somebody inside knew exactly what it was worth. I leaned back, slow, because if 5 internal bids happened before the auction went live, then this wasn't a sluchinist, not a lucky break, not some random buyer stumbling onto abandoned code. It was a controlled sale, and someone inside the building had tried to buy it first. Then the front door of the coffee shop opened, and a gust of cold air swept in. Evan didn't even turn his head. He just said quietly, "Also, I saw the disposition packet title in the system for half a second before my access kicked me out." I kept my eyes on him. "What was it called?" He swallowed. "Harbor, executive transfer." And in that moment, The irritation finally became certainty. Because transfer wasn't cleanup, it was intent. And the meeting tomorrow wasn't about the auction price. It was about who signed off on turning my work into someone else's exit plan. The next morning, I got to the office early, not because I wanted to work, but because I wanted to see what clean looked like when people were trying to erase footprints. The building was quiet, in that sterile way corporate offices are before 9 odd. Lights on, nobody inside them. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and did something I hadn't done in years. I started a timeline. Not a rant, not a manifesto. A timeline with dates, emails, and system logs. The kind of thing you could hand to someone who didn't care about my feelings. Tuesday, 4:02 p.m. Darren rejects Harbor, not strategic. Friday, 3:11 p.m. Access restricted per legal. Following Monday, sales instructed to say not currently planned. 3 months later, Harbor sold as IP package for 4 attached. Yesterday, CFO schedules quick sync disposition. Then I added the only thing that mattered. Pre-listing bids. 5. Internal interest logged. Yes. I stared at that line until it stopped feeling abstract and started feeling like a handprint on glass. At 8:47 a.m., Tanya, my manager, walked by with her coffee and slowed when she saw me. "You're early," she said. "So are you," I replied. She hesitated like she wanted to ask and didn't want to know. "You okay?" I considered lying. Then I looked at her and realized something. Tanya wasn't Darren. She wasn't legal. She didn't profit from whatever this was. She was just someone trying to survive inside a structure that rewarded obedience. "I got pulled into Mark's meeting," I said. Her face tightened. "What meeting?" "The Harbor disposition." For half a second she didn't mask it. Shock. Then she tried to cover it with professionalism. "I didn't know it was, still a thing," she said. "It isn't," I said. "It's a sale." Her lips parted, then closed again. She looked around the aisle like someone might be listening. "Just be careful," she murmured and walked away. That was the moment I realized how far above my pay grade this had always been. Because if Tanya didn't know, that meant it wasn't just a product decision. It was compartmentalized. At 9 I walked into 14B, and the air smelled like dry erase markers and expensive cologne. CFO Mark was already there with a thin stack of papers and that calm, sleep-deprived focus finance people get when they're trying to stop a leak. Asha from legal sat to his left, laptop open, unreadable. Rena from compliance sat with a binder tabbed like she'd prepared for court. Darren arrived last, as if the room had been built to wait for him. He smiled at me like we were teammates. "Hey," he said, "appreciate you joining. This is just a quick alignment." I sat down without returning the smile. Mark didn't waste time. He slid a printout into the center of the table. Same auction listing, same number. $400,000. He tapped it once. "If this project was rejected and archived," he said, looking directly at Darren, "why did we sell it?" Darren exhaled like this was annoying, not alarming. "Because it was non-core," he said. "We weren't going to build it. So we monetized what we could." Mark didn't blink. "And who decided it was eligible for disposition?" Darren's gaze flicked to Asha for a fraction of a second. So fast most people would miss it. Then he said, "It went through the standard process." Asha's face remained neutral. "The process exists to protect the company," she said like she was reciting policy, "not to decide strategy." Mark's pen stopped moving. "Then let's talk about protection. The asset was valued at near zero internally, yet it sold for 4.2 months. That's a material discrepancy." Rena from compliance finally spoke. "It's also a question of representation. If we listed it as abandoned, while there was internal interest, we have exposure." Darren's smile tightened. "Internal interest?" he repeated like the phrase was foreign. Mark flipped a page and slid it toward him. Pre-listing bids. 5. Logged before public listing. The room went very quiet. Darren leaned forward, eyes scanning. and I watched something subtle happen. The confident executive posture slipped for just a second, replaced by calculation. Then he sat back and said, "I'm not sure what you're looking at. That might be a system artifact. People watch listings. Doesn't mean anything." Mark's tone stayed even. "It means someone inside tried to buy it before the market saw it." Darren laughed once, short, humorless. "Buy it? That's ridiculous. We don't buy our own IP." Aisha's fingers paused over her keyboard. "No, actually," she said, and it was the first time she sounded less like policy and more like a person, "there are scenarios where executives attempt to acquire abandoned assets through external entities. That's why we have conflict of interest reporting." Darren's head turned slowly toward her. "Are you implying something?" "I'm stating what the policy covers," she answered. Mark looked at me for the first time. "You built Harbor," he said. "Did you know it was being sold?" "No," I said. "I was told to archive it and I was locked out." Darren cut in smoothly. "We restricted access for security. Standard." Mark nodded, but his eyes stayed on Darren. "And who sponsored the disposition request? I need the packet." Asha responded before Darren could. "The packet exists," she said, "but it was initiated under an executive sponsor and filed under a transfer classification. I requested it this morning." Rena's binder opened with a soft thud. "We also need to understand the buyer relationship. If this buyer is connected to anyone here, we have to disclose." Darren's jaw tightened, and then Mark asked the question that changed the temperature in the room. "Darren, did you file a conflict disclosure related to Harbor?" Darren stared at him like he'd been insulted. "Of course not. Because there's nothing to disclose." Mark didn't argue. He just slid another page across the table. It was a simple report, one of those boring internal exports that only finance and compliance people look at. In the top right corner, there was a name next to sponsor, Darren Klein. Under it, a timestamp from 3 weeks before the auction went live. And beneath that, in the approval chain, a line labeled Legal Review with Asha's name. Asha's eyes flickered down, then up. "This wasn't routed through my queue," she said quietly. "This is a signature stamp." Darren's face shifted, fast. Anger, then control. "That's not possible," he said. "That would imply—" Mark leaned forward slightly. "Yeah, it implies someone used your authority to initiate the transfer. Or you initiated it and tried to keep it off the standard path." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Because everyone in that room understood the same thing at the same time. If Darren was involved, it was fraud. If Darren wasn't involved, someone had access to executive-level sponsorship and legal stamping. Either way, the company had a problem bigger than my feelings. I sat there, hands folded, watching the people who had once told me, "Stay focused," realize their focus had been stolen. And then Darren looked at me, really looked at me, with something like resentment, like I wasn't an employee anymore, like I was evidence. That night, I stopped being the hero. I became the guy who kept receipts. By the time I got back to my desk, the office already felt different, like everyone had been quietly told to stop talking. My Slack notifications were normal. My calendar was not. A new invite sat on top of everything else. Harbor Preservation plus Review. Attendees: CFO Mark, Legal, Asha, Compliance, Rina, IT Security, Dan, me, Duration, 60 minutes, no Darren. And then my badge stopped opening doors to 2 floors I'd accessed for years. Not a dramatic walk of shame, just a soft denial beep that said, "You're on someone's list now." Dan from IT Security met me in the hallway. He wasn't aggressive, just procedural, like he'd done this 1,000 times and hated everyone. "Hey," he said, "this isn't about you. We're putting a hold on certain systems while legal does preservation." "Preservation of what?" I asked, though I already knew. He looked down at a tablet. "Emails, CLM records, disposition platform logs, anything tied to Harbor. We're freezing deletion and changing permissions so nothing gets accidentally modified." Accidentally. Right. In the room, Mark didn't start with feelings. He started with instructions. From this moment, he said, assume every action you take is discoverable. Don't forward anything externally. Don't delete anything. If you find something, bring it to us. I nodded. I've kept my own archive. Aisha's eyes lifted. What kind of archive? I slid my laptop forward and opened the save folder. The rejection recap email, the access restriction note, the timeline of the archive actions, clean, dated, boring in the best way. Asha didn't smile, but something in her face loosened. That's helpful, she said. Rena's voice was sharper. We need to know exactly what was sold, not what Darren called it, what it contained. So I did what I'd done for 9 months. I explained the system like a professional. I listed components, dependencies, customer-facing promises we never shipped, and the internal tooling we used to generate evidence trails. Then I said the sentence that made Dan sit up. Part of Harbor includes connectors to customer identity providers and retention policies. If the package was transferred without proper redaction, it's not just IP, it's security risk. Mark's pen stopped. Do you have proof it was included? I don't, I said. But the IP package wouldn't be worth 4.2 without those pieces. Rena snapped her binder open. Then we'd treat it as included until proven otherwise. That's how corporate chaos looks in real life. Not shouting. A checklist turning into a threat assessment. Dan began pulling up logs on the screen. He navigated to the CLM system where approvals lived. The signature stamp that had Aisha's name attached wasn't a signature at all. It was an automated approval object applied by a service account called Legal Ops Bot. Asha's jaw tightened. That bot only runs off approved templates. Dan clicked again and pulled the metadata. Template was cloned. 3 weeks ago, the clone was created by... He paused, then read it. Darren's executive assistant. The air went heavy. Mark didn't react emotionally. He reacted like a CFO watching his company step toward litigation. Who has permission to trigger that bot? He asked. Dan swallowed. Executive admins can initiate workflows. It's legacy. We've been meaning to lock it down. Aisha's voice went quiet and dangerous. Meaning you never thought someone would use it to push a transfer through without my cue. Dan didn't defend himself. He didn't have a defense. Mark looked at me. Did Darren ever tell you he was selling it? No, I said. He told me it was dead. He told sales to say not planned. He locked me out. I pulled up the email. I slid it across the table. Asha took a photo of the screen like she was documenting a crime scene. Then Rena asked the next real question. Buyer? Mark nodded once. We pulled the KYC file from the auction broker. He turned a page toward us. It wasn't a name that mattered. It was a wire instruction and a beneficial owner attestation. Palisade Ridge Ventures, yes. But the contact phone number, just one line down, was linked to a personal email domain I recognized instantly, because it matched the footer from Darren's side hustle keynote he'd bragged about at the holiday party, a little consulting brand he used to sound important. Rena didn't look at me when she said it. We're placing Darren on administrative leave. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something colder. Because leave is what companies do when they're deciding whether to protect themselves or sacrifice someone. And I knew Darren was the kind of man who wouldn't go quietly. I found out how true that was an hour later. Tanya pinged me. HR wants to see you. Now. It wasn't HR, it was Darren, standing just outside the HR suite with that same polished calm, like he'd rehearsed his face in a mirror. Hey, he said, like we were catching up. This is getting blown out of proportion. I didn't move toward him. I didn't move away. You're on leave, I said. He smiled, but his eyes didn't. Mark can't put me on leave. Not like that. Not without the CEO. I watched his mouth form the words, not without the CEO. A reminder that his power wasn't just a title. It was a network. He lowered his voice. Listen, they're going to ask you to make statements. They'll use you as a wedge. Don't let them. You sold a rejected project for $4.2 million, I said, and my name isn't on any of it. His smile twitched. Your name was never going to be on it. You're an employee. The company owns it. The company does, I agreed. So why did your assistant clone a legal template to push a transfer through a bot? That was the first crack. Not rage, calculation failing in real time. He stepped closer. You don't understand how executive processes work. I understand access, I said. You made sure I didn't have it. His voice hardened. If you keep pushing, this becomes a performance issue. You want your severance clean. You want references. You want to land somewhere else. There it was. The real Darren. The one who didn't reject projects. He rejected people. I looked at him and felt something settle inside me, solid and quiet. They thought I was gone, I said. I wasn't. His eyes narrowed. Careful. I nodded once. You too. He walked away like he'd won, but his shoulders were tense. He wasn't controlling the room anymore. He was trying to control the story. That afternoon, Mark's assistant emailed the entire leadership chain a short note. All harbor-related transfers are paused pending investigation. Then another note went out to the broker. Do not release additional materials to buyer. Preserve all bid logs and communications. Rena stopped by my desk at 6:30 when most people had already fled. You did the right thing, she said. It wasn't comfort. It was acknowledgement. What happens now? I asked. She looked toward the dark conference rooms. Now we find out whether Darren tried to steal from the company or whether the company quietly let him. She turned to leave, then added one more line. Soft, almost reluctant. And if it's the second one, this gets ugly. And in that moment, I realized the investigation wasn't the chaos. The chaos was what came after. Because somewhere behind the clean language, administrative leave, preservation, review, there was a board that didn't forgive surprises. And a man like Darren doesn't lose 4-point teamers without trying to take someone down with him. The day after Darren cornered me outside HR, my access came back, but only halfway. I could badge into my floor again. I could log into my email. I could do my job. But every time I clicked anything related to Harbor, a banner sat at the top of the screen like a warning label. Litigation hold. Do not delete or modify. And then, right before lunch, Tanya forwarded me a message from HR with no comment. From Darren Klein to HR business partner, CEO's chief of staff subject. Urgent, employee misconduct, Harbor. He was claiming I'd retained unauthorized copies of company IP, circumvented access controls, and shared internal materials outside the organization. It was written in that corporate language that sounds reasonable until you know it's a weapon. I stared at it for a full minute, waiting for the anger to arrive. It didn't. What arrived was something worse. Certainty. Because the only way Darren survived this was if he turned the story into me being the problem. A rogue engineer, a disgruntled employee, a convenient villain. I opened my timeline document, added one more line, and saved it. Darren attempts to reframe as misconduct, 12:07 p.m. Then I replied to HR with one sentence. I have an archive of directives and timestamps, proving I followed instructions. Please include legal and compliance on all further communication. No emotion, no threats, just structure. That afternoon, Asha brought in outside counsel, an employment and investigations firm that looked like it existed solely to write reports nobody wanted read aloud. They booked a small room, asked for my laptop, and told me they were recording. The attorney started gently, like this was going to be a misunderstanding. When were you first informed that Harbor was being discontinued? Tuesday, 4 p.m., I said. Darren rejected it as non-strategic and instructed me to archive it. Do you have that instruction in writing? I slid my folder across the table and opened the saved email thread. Darren's bullet points, access restrictions, sales messaging, the date, the time, the attendees. The attorney didn't react. He just nodded and said, "Thank you." Then he asked the question Darren was betting on. Have you ever shared harbor materials outside the company? No, I said. I mirrored release notes and documentation on my local machine to complete the archive process. I did not transfer materials outside. I can show you the logs for my machine and email activity. Aisha watched me without blinking. Show us, she said. Dan from IT security rolled in a cart like we were in a hospital. He plugged in a forensic drive, opened a dashboard, and started pulling up records. First, outbound email logs. No attachments to external addresses. No data exfiltration patterns. Nothing. Second, endpoint activity. Normal. Boring. The kind of boring you want when someone's accusing you of theft. The attorney's pen paused. So Darren's allegation is unsupported, he said. Asha didn't answer. Dan did something else instead. He pulled up the only thing that mattered, the access history for the harbor repository, after I'd been locked out. And that's when the room finally shifted. Because the data wasn't vague. It wasn't interpretive. It was a list of timestamps and accounts. A week after my access was removed, an elevated account, execops admin, cloned the repo. 2 days later, the same account exported the Confluence space. 3 days after that, Legal Opius bot applied the approval stamp to a transfer packet that never hit Asha's queue. Then an email thread appeared in the broker's mailbox, captured through the broker's cooperation request, where Darren's consulting domain email asked casually for the cleanest way to package the deliverables for auction. Dan zoomed in on one line and read it out loud. Sender IP matches Darren's home ISP. For the first time, I saw Asha's composure crack, not into emotion, into focus. Rena came in halfway through, listened for 30 seconds and said, "We escalate to the board. No drama, no speeches, just a decision." The board session happened 2 days later. I wasn't in the room, but Mark called me after and told me what happened in the only language that matters in corporate life. Short sentences with nouns and verbs. They confronted him, Mark said. He denied. Then we showed the logs. I waited. He blamed his assistant, said she misrouted the packet. And, I asked, and the assistant had already cooperated. She said Darren instructed her to clone the legal template. She has the text message. My grip tightened on my phone. Mark's voice stayed controlled, but I could hear the satisfaction underneath it, the satisfaction of a number balancing. The buyer entity, he continued, wasn't random. Beneficial owner was Darren's brother-in-law. Darren signed the conflict attestation stating no related party involvement. So he lied, I said. Yes, Mark replied, in writing. That night, the company filed for an emergency injunction. Not a cinematic courtroom moment, an ugly, fast legal move to stop the buyer from using or transferring anything they received. The broker froze the account. The buyer got served. The buyer's attorney called it a misunderstanding. Then Dan forwarded Asha something that turned misunderstanding into problem. A receipt, a wire confirmation, a planned second transfer scheduled a week after the first, routing the funds from Palisade Ridge through a consulting invoice shell and into an account Darren controlled. It wasn't just theft. It was laundering the story. The next morning, Darren was terminated for cause. No goodbye email, no all-hands explanation. Just a quiet update in the org chart and a calendar purge that wiped his name from every meeting like he'd never existed. People whispered, of course. They always do. But the part the hallway never sees is what matters. The board authorized litigation. The company reported the incident to its insurers, and outside counsel drafted a referral package in case law enforcement needed it. Paperwork. Again. A week later, I got pulled into 14B one last time. Mark, Asha, Rena, and Tanya were there. Tanya looked tired in a way that made me feel guilty for surviving. Mark slid a new document across the table. Remediation plan, he said. We're rebuilding trust with customers. We're also rebuilding Harbor properly. I stared at the title. Harbor Enterprise Compliance Add-on Revived. Rena spoke without softness. We have 3 major clients asking why we killed it. We have 2 asking if their data was exposed. We need a clean answer, and we need a leader who understands the system and the risks. Aisha added, and we need to show internally and externally that the person who built it wasn't the problem. Mark looked at me. We're offering you the program lead role, title change, compensation adjustment, equity refresh, and a retention bonus tied to shipping the first customer release. It wasn't revenge, it was acknowledgement. I didn't say yes right away. I asked for the details in writing. I asked for scope, authority, and protection from retaliation. Mark nodded. You'll have it. Tanya finally spoke. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for how it went down. I believed her, because she didn't say it like an apology that wanted forgiveness. She said it like a person who'd watched a system fail and didn't know how to fix it, until now. That evening I went home, opened my laptop, and dragged my timeline document into a folder labeled Closed. Then I archived it, not because I'd moved on, because the story had an ending that didn't leave questions. The project wasn't rejected because it was worthless. It was rejected because it was valuable. And someone thought he could steal value by controlling access and paperwork. He couldn't. The CFO's question, if it was rejected, why did we sell it? Didn't just expose him. It exposed the truth I should have understood from day one. In corporate life, people can rewrite narratives, but they can't rewrite logs. I didn't win by yelling. I didn't win by threatening. I won the way real adults win in bad systems. I kept receipts.